Over the last few months, there's one question I found myself asking quite frequently. Is FM22 too easy? And I'm not the only one thinking it either. In community polls, both here on YouTube and over on Twitter in recent weeks, over 30% of you have agreed that this year's edition seems easier than previous ones. Well, if you're one of those people and you're looking for simple ways to ramp up the difficulty, then stick around, as in this week's edition of my top 3 series, I'll be sharing my top 3 basic tips to help make your next save that bit more realistic and more challenging too. If you like the sound of that, then please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. You can find the rest of this top 3 playlist and all the other key links up in the eye above. But let's go and get straight in to number 3. And at number 3, we're going to start with a fairly simple and probably quite common one in the Football Manager community, and that is to stop using the player and staff search screens. Now, I know some of you will already do this, or probably be saying, "That's obvious, you idiot," at your screen right now. However, having done this for most of my saves over many years, it undoubtedly changes the dynamics of how you manage your recruitment. Not everyone will agree with me here, but I also think that player and staff search screens are among the most unrealistic things in Football Manager, with your scouted list probably being a far fairer representation of your club's actual recruitment reach. Of course, this change also means you have to trust your staff more, particularly when they're suggesting staff of vacancy in the clubs in backroom advice meetings and etc. You also get more of an opportunity to use traditional job adverts, focus on setting up scouting priorities for players, and other areas that are often neglected when you're using the player and staff search screens. But either way, it definitely changes a manager's work in the transfer window. It definitely changes their approach to recruiting staff. And I've always found it a fun way to make Football Manager more challenging. Hopefully, you'll find the same outcome. Now, of course, while I don't need to give you a demonstration for this one in FM because you just avoid using the player and staff search screens, I am going to show you some of the alternative screens and things you can use to combat not having access to player and staff searches. So if we're avoiding use of the player and staff search screens, what are we going to do instead? Well, for players, it's nice and easy. My recommendation is, instead of using player search, go to the one directly below, which is scouted reports. This is all of the players from that pool that the club may recognise that have actually been looked at in detail to make you aware of as a transfer target. For me, it's a far more realistic way of doing recruitment. Of course, there are going to be some big names in the footballing world that you know you're not going to need to scout. If you want to sign Messi or try to, you can just go and look him up. No one's saying that's breaking the rules, but there are some players from other nations and leagues that you wouldn't know and that the club wouldn't have on their radar without scouting. So for me, this is the best way to try and replicate that. The staff inside as an alternative, instead of using the staff search screen, we've obviously got the backroom advice meetings or the staff meetings, which you can set every week, 2 weeks or month to suit your needs. But if we go to the job centre, a screen that most of us only use when we want to find a job for ourselves, you can actually place adverts for other staff too. This was something that was a lot more commonly used back in the older days of FM, but you go to place advert and anywhere where you've got vacant roles, you're able to go and put out an advert for them. A couple of weeks later, you get an item in your inbox telling you all the people that have seen your advert and applied and want to work at the club. And again, for me, that's maybe a slightly more realistic way of doing it. Unless, of course, you're moving from club to club, you can go and look at some of your connections, some of the people you've worked with before. But I find it just gives it a more realistic feel, rather than just being able to pick from any staff that are within your scouting range. But that's my personal opinion at number 3. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 is formed by a trilogy of game decisions and settings made before you actually start your save or career. These are as follows. Firstly, before we even load our game database, we're going to start by disabling the first transfer window. You could argue that this should perhaps be a default for all of us out of fairness to the AI manager. The initial game and the January updates are both released after most transfer windows are closed, and normally most clubs have made all their signings and used up their budget. So let's see how good we are at dealing with the voids and imbalances in the squad we inherit, rather than just trying to fill in the gaps. And to make dealing with that more difficult, let's make 2 further setting adjustments once we go to start our career. So to complete our Holy Trilogy, we are going to start with no coaching badges and Sunday League experience. Of course, many of you will know these are the lowest possible settings, and how much they hinder you depend on the club you start at. Not having any coaching badges is more likely to harm you at the lower reputation clubs, as you're unlikely to be given either the time or the investment to complete coaching badges by your club in the early stages of your career. You'll likely need to produce ridiculous amounts of success just to earn the right to do your initial badges. In contrast, a lack of reputation and experience is more likely to cause a problem at bigger reputation clubs. You'll be managing bigger egos in a dressing room who'll be asking, who the hell are you when you start at the club? And why should they respect you when you've got no experience or standing within the game? With dynamics and morale being so pivotal in FM22, anything that makes that more difficult to master is a big tick when it comes to creating a challenging save. The reason I've grouped all three of these together, well, it's statistically proven that you're most vulnerable and dispensable in the early stages of your management career, both in FM and in real life. So the harder you make your first season, the bigger chance you have of suffering a significant setback. A simple but effective tip, this one. Let me show you how to make the settings in FM just in case you don't know, and then we'll move on to top spot. For the first setting in number 2, we need to go right to the start of the career game setup. When you're picking your team, or even if you pick team later, you're then going to go to advanced setup. Now from here, we're going to select our relevant option. So automatically by default, you've got the do not add key staff. People debate whether to have attribute masking on or off. For me, it just depends on the save and what I need people to see in videos. But what we're going to do is disable first transfer window activity. That means you can't do anything, not even free signings, in the first transfer window. Makes the game more realistic. You're left with the squad that they've actually got in real life, and you get to work with the imbalances that your predecessor has left behind. Let's go and load this game up though, then I can show you the other two, just in case you're not aware. So to complete number 2, we're going to pick the team that we're going to manage. We've set up our profile already, but when we head over to managerial style, we want to make sure that we've got these settings. Now, most people just have it ticked like this and have the automatic ones for their club. We know this from the debates we've done on streams and from the community polls we've done. What we want is no coaching badges at all and Sunday League football at the minimum experience. Which side of this affects you more, as we've discussed? Here, having no reputation at Norwich is going to be a massive burden when managing Premier League players, and it's probably going to reduce the pool of players we can pick from in recruitment too. Simple and effective settings tips to make your save more difficult, and one that from our community polls in recent weeks, I'm really surprised that more people don't do already. But with that done, let's move on to a more extreme one and a more niche one. It's time for the Gold Medal Award, number 1. On to my number 1 tip to make your save more difficult, and this is probably the least used of the 3, and with good reason, because it's fairly extreme, but stick with me on this one. The best way to make our next save more difficult is to hand over team selection to one of your staff. But you're the manager, you're probably thinking, what's the point? Well, there's a very good reason I've put this one top. As well as being difficult, we've all heard those quite frankly frequent stories from the footballing world about those pesky owners and people from the boardroom, or people linked to the boardroom, that get a little too involved in the footballing side of things. Well, we don't really get to experience that pressure in Football Manager, I'd imagine partly for legal reasons. However, there is scope for you to partly recreate this situation in FM22. Unfortunately, you can't set the owner or director of football to pick your team in Football Manager, but you can set other staff in your coaching team to do so. I'll show you where to find this in the FM responsibilities in a moment, as it's maybe not under the category you'd expect it to be, but you can simply set your assistant or any other coaching staff member to handle your team selection and test how good you really are. Will you become another one of those horror stories? Will your colleagues' decisions cost you results, squad harmony, or even worse, your job? Alternatively, can you show how much of a class act you really are? It's a very unique way to play Football Manager, but it's certainly interesting and replicates an eventuality that we all know occurs from time to time in real life. This challenge can be made more easy or difficult too. You can choose a staff member with either the best player judgment and tactical knowledge, or the worst if you want to go really extreme. Let's go over to FM and I'll show you very quickly how to do this with a click of a button. And for number 1, we need to come to staff responsibilities. It's not really in the place you'd expect it to be, setting your assistant or coaching staff to manage your team selection. You'd probably expect it to be in match, and you may be rightly so with that. You can obviously ramp up the difficulty in this section though by adding the touchline instructions, the team talks, etc. You can hand them over as well. But the area we're looking for is actually in staff. and the first option on the page is to handle team selection. I've shown you plenty of the other ones further down for the head coach challenge and things before on the channel, but handles team selection can be automatically delegated to the assistant, or you can pick a selection of staff. Unfortunately, you can't do the director of football or the owner to replicate those real situations we've seen in real life, but you can select any of these, and if you want a harder challenge, pick the one with the worst judgment and the worst tactical knowledge. For now though, we're just going to make it Craig Shakespeare, so we're showing you the example of what can be done. I appreciate it's a fairly niche way of playing Football Manager, but it certainly makes it a hell of a lot more challenging. So those are just my top 3 simple tips to make your next FM22 save that little bit more challenging. Let me know down in the comments how many of the 3 you currently employ and whether you've ever tried the others before. Give me your best suggestions too, and let me know any other top 3s you'd like to see in the future. And of course, we'll have a look at giving them a go. If you enjoyed this video, please do chuck a thumbs up on it, subscribe and hit the notification bell for a new episode of Top 3 every Sunday evening. That's in addition to our regular FM22 content. You can see the full series playlist in the eye above, as well as other key links. The previous episode next to my head right now. So enjoy that one, and I'll see you here again soon. Thanks for watching.